Yeah, greetings, viewers, listeners. This is Sam Zima. Welcome to COMETSA Television Network. This is the Directorship, Governance and Board Management 101 conversation. The mind, the journey to destiny. We apply our mind to the journey that takes us to our destiny. We are established under the concept of the idea. We inform and entertain, we develop and educate, we empower and support, we associate and network. Welcome. I am joined by my colleagues, the co-host or the main host, let me rather say so, Ramabaga Avel Chimule. He will tell you who he is, and he is the main person behind the show, joined by his co-host, the guest co-host, I might say, he might become a regular, George Mutenda Zamera, and they are welcoming one of our subject matter experts, and they will tell you who he is. Let me not spoil it for them. George and Avel, brothers, it is over to you.
Abel is on mute, so I'll just introduce myself first. The name is George Mutenda Zamera. I'm a founder and CEO at Vula Unlock Consulting. We are executive and business coaches, and my co-host is Abel. He will introduce himself.
Thanks, Josh. It's Ramabag Abel Simula here on COMETSA Radio in the boardroom talk with George. I'm the CEO and founder of Novelquip Investment Holdings. I'm also the executive editor-in-chief at SPM Publishers International. It's a new online business magazine, a publication that we're getting off the ground and looking forward to exciting times. Our talk is on directorship, governance, and board management. And indeed, George, we have a blessing of having Mr. Guy Harris as our guest today. Mr. Harris is quite extensively exposed to governance, to strategic leadership, and also assisting entrepreneurs on how they can be able to leverage on their passion, their innovation to ensure that they can create employment and entities that can build our economy as South Africa. Welcome on board, Guy.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Now we're going to go into governance. We know that in these critical times, there has been quite a number of issues that have been raised around how leaders and the boards are managed to ensure that we are able to achieve more in terms of what we need to achieve. And that said, we saw it necessary to engage on this particular topic and get our guests to share more in terms of what is it that board of directors have to do, and also to say what do we do to manage the conflicts of interest, and also the role of boards in corporate governance and strategic leadership. Just to kick off, Mr. Guy Harris, just to give the basics, what do you believe is a pragmatic definition and description of the board of directors?
It's one word, and that's governance. They're not involved as management. They're not involved as shareholders. They're there purely for governance and oversight, and I'll expand on that in a minute. Just let me go back 1 minute and say I'm really involved in scaling medium enterprises that are going to be creating employment, particularly for NEETs. That's young people who are not in employment, education, or training. Because that's, if we don't get those people employed, so I don't do survivalist micro entrepreneurs that are rotating jobs. I do scaling medium enterprises that are going to be be able to survive and to create the jobs that are so necessary in our country. Going back to governance, in terms of the company, the rule number one is that you've always got to act in the company's best interest. So, for example, when IDC appointed me to a board that I chair in George, I made it very clear when I accepted that appointment that I would never act just in the interests of the Industrial Development Corporation. I've got to act in the interests of the company and all its stakeholders. There are some people on that board who sit there as shareholders or as other funders and that, but I always say, take off your shareholder hat, take off your employee hat, take off all your other hats. The only hat when you're sitting in that board meeting is in the best interests of the company, and that's all of its stakeholders. So I think I'm very excited about the move from capitalist management to stakeholder management, and I think as that takes fire, we're going to get a lot better corporate sector, and a lot of the greed that we see in organizations will hopefully disappear, and hopefully we've seen the end of the dominant chair or dominant CEO that manipulates the board and just tells them what he or she wants them to know rather than what they need to know.
If I could just, following from what he has said, that you are involved in scaling medium enterprises. The issue around boards of governance, etc., is usually associated with your bigger companies, your listed companies, etc. In the field that you're in, with the small players that you work with, do the same principles apply? Maybe you could help the listeners with that.
Exactly the same. The only difference is scale. So if I'm a startup entrepreneur, my first board meeting is actually myself in the bath, and I have it between the different parts of my head. The governance the earlier you can get good governance practices in your business, even if you're a 1 or 2 person business, and I sit on a couple of advisory boards where they haven't actually formulated the governance board, but I'm advising those organizations that have got the potential to scale. And we go through the same things that I would have gone through if I had still been on the board of Bell Equipment, which is a listed company, or Avis. I was on the board of Avis for a short period of time, or any of the other big boards that I'm on. And unfortunately, we tend to say one size fits all. You're a SME, whether that's a survivalist micro-entrepreneur enterprise or a scalable medium enterprise, we try and have the same. Whether you're a sole proprietor or whether you're a lifestyle business, a family business, all of those different ones need different types of governance structures, but it all comes down to the board acting in the best interests of the company as a whole, not in any secular interest. So when I was accepted some of these boards, I was fortunate to be in a discussion with one of the big legal firms. I'm not going to say who it is, and they did me a really nice little summary document on the role of the shareholder, the role of the manager, and the role of the boards. And now often people are the same. So you can have a sole proprietor, the person who starts a business is the manager, the shareholder, and the board. But you need to try and look at 3 different hats. So I often say to the board members, what hat are you wearing? And if they're not saying they're wearing the board hat, I'd say, take that hat off, go out of the room and come back in with your board hat on, and always do things that are in the best interests of the company and all of its stakeholders, not one particular stakeholder. Thanks.
Wow.
Just to provide more clarity in terms of, ensuring that boards act in the interest of the company that they are leading. What are some of the critical roles and responsibilities that are common irrespective of the size of the entity? And secondly, the values and principles that should be enshrined and embodied by each of the players within the value chain of corporate governance?
Yeah, there's really three particular pillars. The first is honesty and integrity. So if I've got a board member who is dishonest or lacks integrity or is not able to take off his other hat or her other hats when they come into that board meeting, I'm going to have a problem. I'm not going to probably be able to change them. So I've got to find them and I've got to root them out. So anybody on the board who is dishonest needs to be moved off that board. You also need openness, a willingness to share. So I'm not going to try and hold on to some piece of information because I'm going to take advantage of that. So the declaration of interest is particularly important, and you've got to be able to create an environment where the CEO and the chairman can tell all the board members all the news, whether it's good or bad, because the last thing you want is a culture of, oh, well, let's not say it because that's going to be bad news and I'm going to get a clap. So unfortunately, in a lot of our culture, and I'm going across ethnic groups, we had a culture of don't say, keep quiet, shut it up, don't keep it under the carpet, don't come out in the open about it. Whether it's to the chief of the village or whether it was to the brigadier in the army, those people don't like to have bad news. Board members have to deal with good and bad news. And I often at the end of a board meeting say, okay, now we've come to the end of the board meeting. What are the 5 questions that you pleased that we didn't ask? Because now we're going to continue the board meeting and ask those questions. Okay? The same thing when I'm pitching for capital or I'm pitching for customers. I always, if I'm a judge on that panel, I say, what are the questions you wish that I didn't ask, that you prepared for? Because then I want to know, because on the basis of no surprises. So one of the very important things is I work on the basis of no surprises. If somebody puts up their hand and say, hey, I've made a mistake, I'm not going to clap them, okay? I'm going to say, okay, let's try and work out a solution that's in the best interest of the company that takes that into account.
I didn't get the third one. Sorry, Brother Abel. You said there were 3 pillars. I got the honesty and integrity, openness and willingness to share. Was the declaration of interest the third one?
Well, no, the first one is integrity and honest. The second one is the openness yes, and willingness to share. And then the third one is active participation. So okay, I'm not looking for people who are there just to collect the director's fees or to do that. You've got to, and being a director is a contact sport. You've got to participate actively. And if somebody is tiptoeing around on eggshells, I don't want them there, because then they're just playing the political game. And we've got enough big P politics problems in the country without having a whole lot of little p politics in our governance structures. So those are the 3 pillars.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Now there is transformation taking place in boards, and you'll find that there's a mix, and more women are moving into boardrooms. And also the diversity in terms of culture, in terms of exposure to different aspects of life and business. How critical is emotional intelligence in ensuring that there is cohesion and collective ownership of the responsibility of boards? And secondly, how then do we enhance diversity management in that space?
Yeah. Diversity management is critical in terms of background, in terms of qualification. So a board made up, I'm an accountant, a board made up just of bookkeepers is going to make sure that very few bookkeeping errors are made, but they're not going to create a lot of market. Okay, just the same way a board made up of grey-white males like me is not going to be able to deal with a company that is going after Generation Z. I'm really pleased that the boards are becoming more diverse. When I started studying, Wiseman and Kushlu qualified as a CA the year before me, so it was very unusual to have people of color at our university classes. Our university classes were probably about 10% female. These days, my guess is it's about 60% female. And so diversity across. So I say, when you're putting your board together, make sure that you've got a skills and attribute matrix so that you don't have everybody in the same. You know, I'm a big Pirates fan, and we don't want 11 goalkeepers in our team. We want to be able to go and score those goals. So it's that diversity, and I welcome. And quite frankly, anybody who doesn't recognize that the economy in South Africa and the world needs to transform has got their head in the sand. So I've got 4 little granddaughters. I'm trying to make the world a better place and a more viable place for them to grow and develop in. And for that, we've got to deal with our unemployment, hence my focus earlier. We've got to deal with the poverty. You can't have 30% of the people going to bed hungry each night or not sure where their meal is going to come from next year and next month. And then we've got to deal with the inequality. A lot of that is driven by greed, particularly at corporate level. But we've seen that when my turn comes at the trough, people in the non-corporate area are also able to make pigs of themselves. And I make no apology for using that word. I apologize if it offends any of your viewers or listeners, but I think the time for messing around is past. We've got to work together to make this a great country, and we do that by addressing unemployment, poverty, inequality. We address it by dealing with the really poor education that's there for 80% of the people in South Africa. Not my kids. My kids had a fantastic education. And we address it through making sure that we're also teaching people the hard skills. And the third thing, in addition to unemployment, poverty, and inequality, is education, hard skills, and the third one is logistics. We're very far away from major markets, major suppliers. A business of tenderpreneurs, I'm sorry, is not a business, okay? That's just it's not sustainable. You cannot sustain a business just on tenders. You can deliver some cream, but nobody's going to build a factory to make desks for a school if they've only got the contract for 1 year or something like that. We've got to have sustainable businesses, and sustainability is really important. To go back, the emotional quotient is really important. It's not easy juggling all of these balls in the air at the same time, and you've got to have the ability. You've also got the ability to have the ability to know when you don't know. So that's one of the most important things. When do I need to go and ask one of my mentors? When do I need to go and get a legal opinion? When do I need to do those kinds of things? And yeah, so to me, those are really important. I hope I've answered the question. Yeah.
Guy, if I could go back on the issue of diversity, the inclusion of women on boards, because that's a very critical issue. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, and practically from your own experience, where do we stand as South African companies? You can break it into listed companies, unlisted companies, the medium scale business. Where are we on that journey? And where do you think we should be, and how long should we take to get there?
Yeah, we should be at least on an 8 or a 9 out of 10. We're probably sitting on a 2 or a 3. The one exception would be family companies, where very often there's a matriarch. But in terms of family companies, often the matriarch governs not from the board level, but governs at the dining room table on a Sunday lunchtime. And you've got to understand that, and you can't fight it. So I worked for Bell Equipment, a family company. We knew that we were a board. I was a independent non-executive director there. I chaired their first audit committee, etc., etc. I knew that at the end of the board meeting, there was a corner office where the three brothers would gather, and then even if they agreed to something, they still had to take it back to Mrs. Bell at the Sunday dining room table. So that's the reality of life. You know, if I'm 80% owned by the PIC or IDC or a big corporate, I've got to deal with that stakeholder. And for all of my stakeholders, I need to remember that there are four key things: the needs, the interests, concerns, and expectations. And if we're not dealing with all of those, so sometimes we just tick the box and we say, well, we've done our stakeholder analysis. And there's a very well-known company, which I won't name, who did that in terms of Marikana and said employee housing was an issue. But unfortunately, they did nothing about it. And that caused the death of those people. If they had been proactive. So South African companies generally are good in planning and bad in execution. And let me say, government does not have the monopoly of that.
Very interesting point I want to make a follow-up on about the family-owned businesses and also the issue of diversity, where previously excluded individuals enter the industry, and they are all still very excited, and we all want to experience this beauty of owning something and being in control. Now, how do we manage that with the new entrants into industry? How do we make them understand that actually it's good to bring governance and allow yourself to stand out of the operations and just let the directors or the people that you have appointed run your business? Do you find the scaling that you are doing, do you find situations where people say, I also want to enjoy being the boss and being in charge? Maybe later I will hand over.
That's fine. You can do it, but you've got to earn your freedom. So you're not able to just be the boss because you're the 100% shareholder. You're not able to just be the boss because you're the CEO. Okay. And I will not serve on a board or an advisory board where my opinion is not being valued. Okay. Then I may as well go and play with my granddaughters. I'll get a lot more satisfaction from that. I want to be there when somebody says, I don't have a full deck of cards, and I want a board that's going to be able to help me where I'm weak. So if I'm weak in marketing or in production or in trade unions or labor relations or etc., they want to be able to be helped. So the way in which you can bring your board together is you've got to be able to cover all of the key parts of your business. And there's nothing wrong. I know one organization that besides having a governance board also has an advisory board, because they want to make sure that their stakeholders feel actively involved. So the one word that I use with most people who are starting a business or send me a pitch or something like that, as I say, focus. Okay, and let me be totally honest. I assume none of you are Catholic priests, but it's confession time. I'm not very good with focus, but I know that. Okay, I'm good with ideas and I'm good with network and I'm not afraid to use it, but I need to focus. And so that's why I try and make sure that in what I do, I'm able to do that. So I've got some people, one of them is my wife, the other one is my daughter, the other one is my son, who make sure that I try and focus. Otherwise, they're not going to have bread on the table.
Wow, good point. And for our viewers and listeners who don't know the difference, what is the difference between a governance board and an advisory board? Okay,
and an advisory board is somebody that you go to for advice. So you might have people. So, for example, at Bell, when we were doing BE scorecards and things like that, we lost a lot of money with enterprises who didn't understand the civil engineering and bidding and construction. And we said, fine, we don't want to just tick the box. We want to create sustainable businesses. So we said, we will only get involved in you, in your business, if you're prepared to bring on somebody who has got hands-on, dirt under the fingernails, real experience in bidding for projects. And we didn't mind whether it was male, female, black, white, young or old, but they tended to be older people. And unfortunately, given the nature of the history, a lot of them looked a little bit like me, because those were the people who used to run the construction industry. But bring one of those people on until you brought up your skill level to be able to do that. So don't be afraid to say, hey, I'm not a jack of all trades. I need to go and get that advice, and put your pride in the pocket, and you can learn. You know, one of the big things about turning 40 is from that day on, I never had to apologize for asking a question. Before I was 40, I had to try and, I nearly used a bad word. I had to try and kid people into that I knew everything about everything. I don't, okay? And life is a long time learning experience. And yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and sorry, George, and Abel, this is very, very close to my heart. Which of the two boards make a lot of money by being appointed onto them?
It's more the governance board, because they're the people who've got their neck on the line. You know, if the advisory board makes a slip up, well, I was just the consultant, I wasn't the person. But the rubber, the buck stops with the governance board. So the governance board shouldn't be developing the strategy, but they should be making sure that the strategy is in place. The governance board shouldn't be keeping the books, but they should make sure, with the help of the external and internal auditors, that there is proper controls and that in place, and that management is hands-on. So the buck stops with the governance board. If the business goes under or goes into business rescue, the first question you don't ask is, where were the auditors? You ask, where was management? Because that is your first line of defense. And then the second question you ask is, where was the board? So I've had the dubious pleasure of sitting in Parliament in the spectator gallery when somebody who was well known was brought in, and he tried to indicate that it should have been the auditors that picked it up. And to me, it's not. It's you, sir, were the CEO, or the chairperson, or the things. It was happening on your watch. You need to make sure. And that's why I hate being involved in a board where everything is secretive. So you go into a meeting and actually all the key things have been decided already, and you're expected to just sit there and drink tea and eat prawns and caviar. You're there to get your hands dirty, to walk around the factory, to find out what's going on, to keep your eyes open, to talk to customers, to talk to employees. One of the important things is the exit interviews. When an employee leaves, I want to know, why did that person leave? And should we not have retained them? If they're leaving because it's a toxic environment, then I've got to question whether I should still be in that toxic environment at a board level.
Good stuff. Thank you so much.
Mr. Harris, you touched on the raw nerve of the interrelationship, the board, the executive, and the auditors. And there's always confusion as to who's who in the zoo. What can be done differently to ensure that this interdependence and this value chain is understood properly as to who, runs with things to what particular extent? And if there are any consequence management, how then do we manage that to ensure that accountability rests with the right individual and the right party within this particular value chain? Okay.
There's the responsibility for day-to-day rests with management. The responsibility for the long-term sustainability rests with the board. The responsibility for the auditors, and let's recognize that there are two auditors in this room. There's an external audit and there's an internal audit. And as you can see, grey hair and glasses, I'm an accountant myself, although I moved into consulting rather than stick around in auditing. So the buck really on day-to-day is management. So that if I get a report that so-and-so is gambling at the casino and that person happens to be keeping the petty cash in my company, I need to know that something's happening on my watch and I'm not doing it regularly. If I'm the chairman of that company and I'm getting feedback from the market or from stakeholders. Now, the role of external audit is often misunderstood, and we as auditors have not explained it properly. And that is to pass an opinion on a set of financial statements, and that includes the balance sheet, the income statement, the cash flow. If there are projections in there, we would need to have to give an opinion on that as well. The role of the internal audit is to make sure that the controls that the board thinks are in place and management thinks are in place are being actively applied. So if you look at the risks, you've got your inherent risk, then you've got your existing mitigation factors, and then you've got your residual risk, and then you've got your future mitigation factors. Internal audit is looking as the existing mitigation factors, are those being applied successfully? So, for example, if my risk is for an earthquake and my mitigation for that is an insurance policy, I can't just say, well, no, the board's, the board, don't worry, we've got an insurance broker and they advise us. The board needs to ask on a regular basis, once a year, once every 2 years, what are the uninsured risks? And then if they see on that, earthquake is not insured because we're sitting in series or something like that, and it's too expensive, they need to go and make that inquiry. They need to be applying their mind. So far too often, risk management is a tick the box. Have we looked at risks? Yes, we looked. And the other approach to risk management is the death by 1,000 risks. Okay, I'm interested in what are your top 10 risks and what are you mitigating? What are the further mitigation steps that you can take? The internal audit should be focusing on the existing mitigation steps. So there's a very clear role for the board in terms of oversight, quarter to quarter, because boards shouldn't be meeting more regularly than every 6 weeks to 3 months. And then there's a day-to-day management, and I hope people, there's certain nations that are a lot better at hands-on management, and I don't want to upset any of my Greek or Portuguese friends, but the corner cafe was often run by that person because they were hands-on, and they knew what was in the till, they knew what was in the shelf, they knew what the customer was looking for, etc., etc. That hands-on management is a contact sport. You can't manage remotely. If I want to know how things are going at Pick and Pay, I don't go and ask Raymond Ackerman. I go and ask the checkout lady at the Pick and Pay down the road. Are your takings up or down? Have you got more people coming in or not? So that online hands-on management, and every organization should have a balanced scorecard and a scoreboard. You can't play a game of soccer, rugby, cricket, tennis, whatever, without a scorecard. You need to know what the score is, and you need to know how do I need to adapt that game to make sure that we're going to be able to win it. And to do that, you need hands-on people. And don't come and blame and say, well, where were the auditors when the CEO was putting through journal entries without any review, because they had a very weak CFO who was told, if you want your job, just pass that journal entry. That's not acceptable. Sorry, I can see that you're gonna can this interview and say, let's rather get somebody who's more sane and not as fanatical about these things. But I believe that governance is really, really important.
Yes. No, it's very important. But we have just gone through a few experiences recently.
Yeah.
The Judicial Commission of Inquiry on State Capture,
yes.
COVID-19 procurement, situation, and recently the vaccine rollout diplomacy. So taking this and as a parting shot towards the end of our show, how do you think things could be done differently to achieve, these goals that you have just shared in terms of governance and in terms of the roles and responsibilities of the three parties towards strategic leadership and accountability, especially around conflict of interest?
Yeah. The most important thing is the declaration of the conflict of interest. So I have to, on all the boards that I'm involved, I have to give a list of boards that I'm on, a list of directorships, a list of shareholding, material shareholding, not the 5 pick and pay shares that I bought on the stock exchange 30 years ago. They were actually trust bank shares. I wish they were pick and pay shares. Those kinds of interests are important. You also need to be aware what's going. So I'm actually serve on the council of a TVET college, Volkswagen TVET college here in Cape Town. And I'm pleased to say that we were one of the first TVET colleges that said we want to put the audit report on our PPE procurement on our website, because there needed to be that total transparency. I was in a FinCom meeting yesterday, which I chair, and one of the people was saying, shouldn't FinCom have a say over the award of tenders? No, we don't want to have any say over the award of tenders or the appointment of people. Ours is oversight. Have you asked the right questions? Have you done the right fact-checking, etc.? When it comes to government, and interestingly, some of the examples that you used there, state capture, etc., tend to be public sector rather than private sector. But let me tell you, government doesn't have the monopoly on corruption. There's a lot of it that's happened in the private sector as well. But seeing you talk about the public sector, in my mind, there's too much emphasis in the public sector on conformance and not enough emphasis on performance. So, for example, go back to my TVET college. When we had to do remote learning, we were trying to get devices for our students, and then somebody messed up the tender for the devices so that students weren't able to access that. You need to be realistic. And I think the previous Auditor General, Kimi Mkwetu, did a fantastic job, and the oversight committees in Parliament do a decent job under difficult circumstances. It's too early to tell with the new Auditor General, but she seems to be a person who is doing really well, and the Auditor General's team is probably at the forefront in terms of integrated reporting in the public sector. And you need to use integrated thinking, not just integrated reporting. So I hope that we have reached the rock bottom of these kinds of things, both in the public sector and the private sector. But we all have to ask ourselves, these things are happening on my watch. All of us are responsible for that. We need to make sure that the people who are going to take the corrective action are mandated in order to be able to take effective corrective action and to operate in the interest. I mean, when I presented to Parliament once around early childhood development, which is a passion of mine, I said, I know that we ask you who've just been elected, because they just started their term for 5 years in Parliament, to make a 25-year decision. But please do it in the interest of those kids, because those kids are the future employees, they're the future customers, they're the future neighbors, of every one of us. And if they don't get a good grounding in their education, we're going to be throwing a lot of money on catch-up, a lot of money on prisons and social services, etc., etc. So, yeah, you know, that to me is another good example. But I think I've gone off topic, and I apologize.
Can I ask I was going to ask a two-part question as we come to the end.
Yes,
one of the major scandals that we had was Steenhoff. So my question would be, what did we learn from that? And
sorry, I didn't hear which major scandal was?
Steenhoff.
Steinhoff, yeah.
Steinhoff, yes.
Sorry.
What did we learn from that? Secondly, if you had a magic wand, what are the 2 or 3 things that you say must be done in South Africa to take us to a level where we are to a level that is acceptable? So the first is, what did we learn from Steinhoff? And secondly, 2 or 3 things that you say must be done as an expert yourself.
The first thing that we learned from Steinhoff is don't accept things at face value. And if you see the warning signs, if the red light's flashing that says you've got a dominant CEO or a dominant chair, and I think in this case it was a dominant CEO who, by the sounds of things, reading all the books and that, seems to have been able to lead a very, very experienced board and audit committee and management team by the nose, and to pull the wool over their eyes. So watch out for those people. Anybody who's a dominant chair who says there's only one way, or dominant CEO who says, I'm going to give you the information that I want you to have. I'm not going to be prepared to give you and I want to change my auditors, and I'm not going to go with a big firm. I'm going to go with a small firm. You've got to question those kinds of decisions. So the lessons that we learned, number one, don't accept a dominant CEO or a dominant chair in that case, or not in that case as well. And the second thing is maintain vigilance. So you've got to be aware. I'm not privy to a lot of the things that happened there, but there should have been enough warning bells going off to say, hey guys, go and look there. You know, I don't know if there were any people who were reporting or who had, I'm trying to find the right word for it, who had a hotline to report suspected fraud, etc., etc. How do we deal with it? It's leadership. So my big concern about all of these scandals, public or private sector, is that the professions are not taking enough of an answer or a role. So unfortunately, some of those are chartered accountants, and they're still members of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. They're still able to do, in some cases, they have been struck off the roll. You can't be a director any longer. I can only think of one where that is the case. The professions need to say, we are losing credibility. If we're not able to out these people and to name and shame, then all we're doing is we are being complicit. We're doing that, and exactly the same thing applies at a leadership in a government level. We need brave leadership. The time for yes men, the time for yeah boss, the time for hey, you know, is over. It's messing with our future, and it's happening on our watch, and we've got to, the responsibility lies with each and every one of us to take an active role and to try and make sure that governance is applied consistently and effectively, and at the same time that we get performance so that the economies can start growing at 6, 7, 8%, and that we don't celebrate 80% matric pass rates when actually only 4% of the kids who start in grade 1 get more than 50% in maths 12 years later. Our matric pass rate is, if you believe that, it's like believing the narrow unemployment rate. It's the expanded unemployment rate that's important. And until we face up to the reality of what the scoreboard is telling us. So I don't want to name any names, but when we lost 2-1 in a quarterfinals in the Africa Cup some years ago, I said, don't worry, we'll just make them the Minister of Education, the Minister of Sport, and then a 30% is a pass. And we lost 2-1, but we can still pass. Life doesn't work like that, okay? We're up against global benchmarks. We need to make sure. And South Africa, from a governance perspective, unfortunately, has crashed badly in terms of governance and governance credibility. And it's up to each one of us on each of the boards that we sit in, each of the councils that we sit on, to make sure that we win that back. And it's got to start at the bottom, and we've got to do it step by step. Thanks.
Wow.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mr. Guy Harris. You have shared quite a mouthful with us, and we are about to close the show, but we're going to continue with the discussion in the second segment of this particular subject in a short while. We appreciate your efforts and your attendance to the show, and also to my co-host, Mr. George Mutetan Sami, and Mr. Sam Sima. Apologies, I'm still trying to master the names. I'm Ramabag Egol Simula on COMETSA Radio. Boardroom Talk, first episode is over. Then we will be able to join us later after taking a break. Thanks a lot, Mr.
And Carolyn is very worthwhile listening to. And you didn't ask me the questions about IT and systems. She has a font of knowledge. She's my go-to person in that. So good person.
Yeah, that's why I put it into her space so that we can be able to have competing, discussions that are complementary. Thanks a lot, Mr. Harris.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Oh, I think Mr. Harris has to come back. You raised some pertinent issues there that even I'm sure the scholars of governance and that's the whole idea, that we want to start a discussion, we want to start a debate. And I really like the point where you say that the days of yes are gone, because so many things went wrong under our watch. And if we continue this way, we'll have no organizations, no business, no country to keep for our generations after us. Thank you so much, and the work you are doing in scaling of medium enterprises. Those are the future corporates, the giants that we want to build. Thank you very much, and
that's a pleasure.
Chimule, George Mutenda-Tamera, you're always willing to come and engage with our industry guests. We appreciate that. It's been wonderful. That was Directorship, Governance, and Board Management 101 conversation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, listeners out there. We will be tuning in again with our next guest. Take care. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Okay.